So today we're thrilled to have USA Today best-selling author, entrepreneur, systems engineer, and former Walt Disney Imagineer Steve Alcorn join us on the podcast to discuss his work on the electronic systems for some of your favorite Epcot Center attractions. So, Steve, it's an honor to have you here. I read your book, Building a Better Mouse, and it really changes the way you view the immense amount of work, collaboration, and effort that goes into creating a major theme park. So, eager to hear some of your war stories. How are you doing today, my friend?
Well, thanks for having me on, Mike. I'm doing good, and
Excellent.
I'm glad you enjoyed the book. I'm glad that we wrote that book way back when we did that because I wouldn't remember any of the stories that are in it at this point. There's been so many projects since Epcot, but some of the greatest stories ever came out of that, and that's how most of the industry learned how to do theme parks, was from being thrown into the chaos that was Epcot's last year or so.
Yeah, and I think as a lifelong Disney Parks fan, particularly Walt Disney World, you go to these parks, you don't realize how much work goes into putting together an attraction, design from a sketch to an actual attraction, and the electrical engineering that goes into making it work, which is so interesting. I read that book.
Yeah, and the field has really changed amazingly over the last 40 years that Alcorn McBride has been doing attractions, and Epcot was another 4 years before that. So when I look back on what we were doing during the Epcot phase, it's like looking at Stone Age tools compared to the way everything is connected now as far as the electronics and software are concerned. And a lot of the other skills have changed as well, the things we expect from theme parks. The bar has certainly been raised, but Epcot was one of the first ones that did raise that bar with things like whole theaters that broke apart and moved through attractions and all sorts of other new technologies that were there for the first time. Now we take things like video playing on demand as an everyday sort of thing that happens on your phone. But back in Epcot days, viewers thought it was magical when they saw their first touch screen and could pull up videos about the different attractions in the park and talk to a live person to make restaurant reservations and so on. Those were all really cutting edge attractions at the time. Some of the stuff that was really difficult to do was stuff like piecing together multiple videos for the end of the Horizons Pavilion, where your vehicle was moving, but what you were seeing on the screen in front of you was moving across multiple projectors that were delivering the video. And boy, back in 1982, it was really hard to do something like that. Now we just throw all that video into one of our uncompressed video players, and it would be able to use a projector to sweep the entire width of that whole area of the attraction. And back in those days, it was pretty sophisticated to just have systems that were interconnected. And the whole idea behind Epcot was new in that there was an Epcot Central. Because when Disneyland was built, everything was in a little closet attached to each individual attraction, and maintenance would have to go out there, find the closet, open something up, and fix a tape player that wasn't working or whatever. So with Epcot, all of that stuff was put into a central location, and one of the first uses of fiber optics connected out from that central location out to all of the different attractions. Well, of course, ironically, what happened over the ensuing years is that everything became so powerful and so small that that's not even needed anymore, that Epcot Central is now just offices and all of the equipment moved back out to the attractions because there is no maintenance anymore. There's no tapes where bin loops have to be cleaned with turtle wax every night to keep the tape sliding across the surfaces. And there's no laser disc players that need to be dusted anymore. So all of that now is in little tiny boxes someplace in the attraction again. So things have come full circle as far as the electronics world. But one thing that's still interconnected in most of the theme parks, even the not super high-end Disney parks these days, is Ethernet, and communications connects everything together now so that maintenance people can diagnose the health of attractions no matter how far-flung they are or how little experience they have with where the closet is in that particular attraction. So it's, in a way, Epcot set the pattern for that centralized control and monitoring, but it also didn't, I think, anticipate how rapidly the technology would advance. Now, things that required Central to do at Epcot, like having racks and racks full of tape cartridges to play the sound as a vehicle went through an attraction like Horizons, which alone had, I think, 170 or so different tape starts. Now that all rides on the vehicle. So for an attraction like a Spider-Man attraction at Universal or whatever, there's a smart system on the vehicle that is precisely synchronized to the wayside systems so that the audio is exactly in sync with the 3D images you're seeing when you're riding on a vehicle. And all of that is being done by probably one of our ride players that's riding on the vehicle and generating multiple tracks of audio, sometimes different audio depending on what seat you're sitting in the vehicle, and delivering it right to the headrest behind your head. And we couldn't have imagined doing things like that during the Epcot days. When we were working on Epcot, we had to invent everything ourselves. There were no systems. It was before the PC, if you can believe that. And so we were building our own computers, writing our own operating systems, programming everything. I remember sitting in my office at the Sunbank building on a stormy afternoon, programming the countdown clock in American Adventure. And, that was a completely custom countdown clock. And I had to count the pulses as the dial went around to count the minutes down and figure out where it was and reset it at the start of the next show. Similarly, every bit of animation equipment, all the control systems for that, all of the audio processing system, all of those circuit boards, everything was designed and built by Imagineering, then called WED, and it was all completely custom. So it was expensive. I mean, Epcot was supposed to cost $400 million, and it cost about $1.2 billion. So a slight project overrun there. But what I saw during those days was the need for off-the-shelf equipment that attractions could use. It's not a huge market, but even at the time, there were quite a few attractions at Disney parks that could use that equipment. And now, of course, there are thousands of places all over the world that use that level of equipment that Alcorn McBride makes. So the idea was to make a little box or something that you could mount in a rack that would do the work of one of those whole cabinets full of custom equipment that we were designing during the Epcot days. So in 1986, I founded Alcorn McBride as basically a consultantship that would design products for whoever needed products. And we worked in industries I was familiar with. I had a background in the music production industry. I designed digital instruments used by stars like Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder and all the big bands during those era were using drum machines and stuff like that. And so I drew on customers from that industry and from the peripherals industry and just other things, and we designed custom products for everybody. But after about 3 years, 4 years, we started getting questions about designing attractions. One of the first ones was the LA Children's Zoo, which wanted a bunch of attractions like stepping tones where you could step on animal footprints and it would play the sounds of the animals. Or there was an attraction that was a Pepper's Ghost effect where they wanted it to look like Betty White wearing a gas mask was wandering around in the skunk exhibit. And so we designed those attractions, and to do them, we designed custom equipment to make that work. So we had to control Laserdisc players and audio playback systems and so on. And so once we had designed those things, we said, well, hey, if they're good enough for us to use, maybe everybody else would like to buy them and use them as well. And so starting with, I think, the Wonders of Life Pavilion at Epcot, they started using our video playback system, our V16 controller to control all their Laserdisc players. And then the Disneyland Parade Route started using our onboard audio systems to play back the music from the Electric Light Parade. And so one by one, our equipment went into different facilities at Disney and Universal Studios in Florida. And so now we make very, very sophisticated multi-channel uncompressed video players, multi-channel audio players. They synchronize within microseconds across multiple units and are really designed specifically for the needs you need in an attraction, which are pretty specific. Number one, it can't ever break. Number two, it's got to be able to synchronize to all sorts of crazy stuff perfectly and be aware of timing that might change during a show, so it has to have a lot of conditional things. And it has to be programmed by people who are really not programmers. They want to write a script, and maybe the script might start to get a little complicated with conditionals and things, but basically they want to script their show no matter how complicated it gets. Thousands of audio tracks, thousands of video tracks, thousands of interactions. They still want it to be a script. not a computer program. And so everything is custom. Everything we make, custom boxes, custom circuit boards, custom operating system. We can't use computers, we can't use PCs and so on. We use them as front ends. You can program our equipment. You could write the scripts using our software running on a PC or a Mac, but we can't use them in the product because our products are supposed to live in a hot closet for 20 years and never require any interaction. They can't crash. You can never have a blue screen of death at a theme park. Nothing no moving parts, pretty much unless we take a direct lightning strike, and even then we have some protection against that. We'll just run for 20 years without a reboot and be fine. So that's what the parks are all looking for all over the world, and that's what we've kept busy doing for almost 40 years now.
Congratulations to you and your wife on a terrific company. Your footprint is all over Epcot Center. You mentioned stepping stones. Could remember the Imagination Pavilion, stepping stones.
Yeah.
Going there for so many years and seeing this technology, and going back to the 1980s when that kind of technology was really becoming more visible and just starting out. And then over the next several decades, advancing to where it is today. But if you're going to Epcot Center for the first time and seeing that, it's like, wow, touch screens. What is this? Now we take it for granted on our cell phones. It's pretty incredible.
Yes, and we certainly had a lot of fun designing all of that stuff, although these days it doesn't make sense. You pretty much can buy one of our products and it'll do those things that you need. These days you could do stepping tones easily. You could do electronic philharmonic easily. You could do rainbow corridor, but it would be really complicated with our equipment. But all of those things were things that I had to design a custom product and program in order to get them to work. And some of them were interesting little challenges, not so much from the computer processing standpoint. A lot of them just used little tiny circuit boards that were custom made. But like if you think about Neon Corridor, that's where a corridor upstairs at Imagination, you would walk into it, and as you entered, it would assign you a color. And as you walked through the corridor, that color would follow you, and there'd be people behind you with their own colors. But then think about what happens if somebody turns around and walks back the other way and crosses the people that are coming in. What do you do? With a little tiny microprocessor, those are some tough decisions to make. And I guess, in a way, that's one of the most fun things to people like me who do the technology, is when we also get to make some of the creative decisions. I think the most fun I ever had was actually doing Legoland in Carlsbad. That park was done by a contractor who used a lot of our gear, and they built all of the cabinets, but then it got to about 2 weeks before opening, and they didn't have anything programmed for the whole park. And also because that was one of the first Legolands, certainly in the US, there was not really an organization at Legoland that was providing all of the things you expect at Disneyland, like the media, for example. And so I was called out, and for 2 weeks before the park opened, I basically would put new software, new sounds, or whatever into a cabinet in some attraction and then run back to the construction trailer and do the next one over and over again while people in the field tested what I had installed. And so this was the early days of the internet, and I was out on the internet looking for sounds like sword fighting sounds and things like that because we had no media. I was splicing all these things together to create sound files, dropping them into the audio reproducers, and then programming them so that when you went through their little roller coaster and there were Lego figures that were sword fighting, you would hear the clinging and clanging. So it was fun to make those creative decisions. There was a kitten and a lion on the entry to this bridge, and I had a little mew sound and I had a roar. And so I purposely put them into the opposite characters. So when you walked past, the kitten would roar and the lion would mew. And it was lots of fun. That was a very fun installation.
Yeah, you have that technical background and also that creative side as well. And I think bridging those two together, blending of creativity and technical expertise, was really what created the memories that I have and many others. And so thank you for creating those memories. It was
Yeah.
really a great time.
Right. You're very welcome. I just finished a memoir last year about some of these experiences in theme parks and other things that have happened to me. And I named it Curious by Design because I think that it's about the intersection of technology and creativity, which is what I've always really loved. And I think that is really embodied in why so many people are fascinated with theme parks, especially theme parks like Epcot because it was.
Yeah. I talk to a lot of people who say, "How can you become an Imagineer? Like, it's such an amazing job to have that creative mind." Obviously, you have to have that mind. You have to be able to apply those techniques and things that you learn to be a creative. What's your best advice for an aspiring creative or an Imagineer at Disney or any other major theme park?
Well, it's a big question. I teach a class at imagineeringclass.com, and one of the topics of the class is how do I get that job? And the first thing before that topic is, well, what job is it? Because when you say an Imagineer, you're talking about a broad range of different talents. And so the way that I got into Imagineering is crazy because my wife, when she was in the third grade, knew that she wanted to work for Disney and design rides. And so that's all she ever tried to do. When she went into college, she went into engineering, both because her father was an engineer and because that was the box she checked on her admittance. Well, I was dating her at that time and I was already 1 year ahead of her. So I transferred into the same school and ended up an engineer almost by accident, although I'd always been interested in designing things. And so when she finished college, she didn't apply for any jobs other than Disney. And she took whatever they offered her, which was a pretty menial position where she was just writing wire lists out on paper. And she was very young. And they kind of treated her, I think, as the department mascot for a few months until they figured out what she could do. And a few years later, by the time Epcot opened, she was the electronic project engineer on 10 of the opening day pavilions, including World of Motion and most of the Circle Vision theaters around World Showcase, plus some less impressive things like the Norway restroom, which was the Denmark restroom at the time, I think, but it had a control cabinet in it for the parade. So anyway, when it became apparent that she was going to be in Florida for a long time, I signed on with Imagineering as a consultant and was sent down on a 2-week business trip that lasted almost 2 years. And so that's where the stories in Building a Better Mouse come from, is my 2-week long business trip. But in general, when people are looking to become an Imagineer, they think that they're going to get to do everything. And if you want to do everything, you should probably design a haunted house or something for your neighborhood, because then you do get to do everything. You get to do the artistic part, you get to do the control part, you get to do the marketing part, and you get to record the spiels. Everything is under your purview. But nobody at Imagineering has that job. There are 1,000 people that job is divided up amongst at Imagineering. And so the first thing you have to do is decide, well, are you the artist? Are you the producer? Are you the engineer? What kind of an engineer? And you have to develop those skill sets before you even think about applying for a job at Imagineering, because Imagineering isn't different than any other company in many respects. The work is the same. The art is the same as you'd find at an ad agency or at a creative company or a designer company of any kind. And the engineering is the same as the engineering that you would find in aerospace or technology or chip development or whatever. It's just the way that these things come together. The script writing is the same as you'd find in Hollywood media and so forth. I would say that it's a little less glamorous than you might think, but at the same time, it is special because the end product is special. It's a lot more fun than building satellites, which was the very first job that I had. But again, I didn't actually build them. I designed one little tiny corner of a circuit board and made sure it would work. And so Disney is a bit like that as well. You have the psychic income of being surrounded by cool stuff, but you're not always the one that's making the cool stuff.
Imagineering has a variety of different jobs. It's not just being an Imagineer and you can do everything. Even though I've heard from some Imagineers who were asked to do everything, but that wasn't their background. And they have to. There's a deadline. You have to. Could you tell us more about your journey to engineering? Tell us your life story and how you got to this point.
Well, as I say, when I wrote Curious by Design, I went back and I started at the very beginning and realized that I'd always been kind of an entrepreneur, building one company after another, whether it was selling comic books. I was really big into collecting Marvel comic books. If I'd saved the ones that I had, I would be a multimillionaire now. I had the hard-to-get ones, like Spider-Man #1, and I would sell them by mail order. I had a printing press. I would set lead type by hand and sell little print jobs. And then in high school, I started a company with a friend in my class who was into electronics, and we built fuzz boxes for guitars where you'd plug your guitar into it and it would make it sound like Black Sabbath. And we sold those, hand built each one of them, and sold them. And I was into computers very early on. Back before there were even assemblers, I was hand coding things in machine language in order to program on my home-built computer a space-based game where you'd chase around and try to shoot up other spaceships. And so in college, I got more into computers. There was a guy named Art Tanaka who was a ham radio operator and very smart guy doing a lot of cool stuff. And he showed me how to build even more elaborate computers. And so while I was in college, I got a Hughes Masters Fellowship. When I was first married, I was going to a graduate school at UCLA and then working on this startup business at home, which made computer kits to put your own computer together in the era right before IBM PCs came along. And so we did that for a couple of years. And the twist was we were using different chips than everybody else was using. Everybody else was making 8080s, which ran a CPM operating system. And then when IBM got into the market, they used a similar chip, but slightly more advanced. But we were doing something else with Motorola chips using 6809s and so on. So we had our little niche there for a couple of years. But when IBM came along, it was like, uh-oh, now the big guys are getting into this. And so that's when I went and decided to go to Florida on my 2-week business trip and spend a couple of years working on Epcot. And when I came back, then I actually was looking for a job while I was still in Florida and was offered a position to head the engineering department at a company called Cambrian Systems, which made disk drive development systems. They would make these giant high-speed spindles that would hold hard disk media and spin it up at 8,000 RPM and test how the heads would fly across the surface of the disks. And companies like IBM would use these to develop their next generation of disks. And that was a great opportunity because that was an engineering department with 40 people. So I got some real management experience from doing that. But the company was on a little shaky financial grounds when I came in, brought in a new president, and the new president didn't actually know how to do anything other than my job. And so I decided that I'd rather go someplace and do my own job. So I ended up working for Roger Lynn at Lynn Electronics. Roger invented the digital drum machine. He had been a lead guitarist with the Leon Russell Band. And so that put me into the heart of the music industry, which was great with me because another of my little startup projects when I was a teenager was I had a full-blown 8-track sound studio in my home, and I sold time to musicians in that sound studio. So working for Lynn was great, and I brought in all my Disney cohorts, and we designed a whole ton of products in an incredibly short period of time. In fact, a friend of mine who I've since met who's from New Zealand, Steve Graham, has just come out with a book about the history of Lynn Electronics and Roger Lynn and so on, and made me have to go back through all of that history for him and figure out exactly what we did and how we did it so fast. And he's now got all the prototypes and stuff that I had collected, and he's so into it, he's now putting together his own little one-of-a-kind collection of stuff from the musical industry from the mid-1980s that we did. And I would have stayed at that company forever, but again, the Japanese came into that market, and Roland and Yamaha started making drum machines, and all of a sudden they weren't worth $5,000 anymore. They were $220. So that is when I decided that it was time to move on to Disney. And that was a course correction for me, because by moving on and founding Alcorn McBride at that point, it allowed me to continue product development for a few years whilst working my way back into themed entertainment. And it was about 10 years that we continued to design products for others and do weird one-of-a-kind things like the machine gun controllers for the Indiana Jones Stunt Theater at Disney MGM Studios is one of our more bizarre things. We did installation work also with our own equipment. I did the Hoover Dam Visitor Center, which was a lot of fun, a little motel in Boulder City there. And Fremont Street and Las Vegas, a lot of stuff in Vegas, a lot of casinos during that period, fun stuff. The Smithsonian, we do a lot of stuff for the Smithsonian. And then we established a company in France as well, right near Paris Disneyland, and had full-time employees there who were Alcorn McBride employees to support all the new stuff going into the second park there and other generations. Since then, I've passed that company on to the guy who ran it for me, Henry Corrado, and he still runs it under the name of Tijix and has also Tijix offices in Japan near Tokyo Disneyland and in Hong Kong near Hong Kong Disneyland. So they install a lot of our equipment at those parks as well. We don't ever install our own equipment anymore because it competes with our own customers who are the integrators who provide the installation services for pretty much all of the parks, to some extent even Disney, although Disney does some of the installation work themselves. But increasingly, a lot of the cabinet building is contracted out to integrators who will build the stuff. So there's a layer interposed between us and the final end user who is the theme park. And so we don't want to compete with them, but we do support them. And so one of the things about Alcorn McBride is our equipment's not particularly cheap, but built into it is all the training, all the support, all the warranty, everything. You buy the equipment and it just works and it's supported. If somebody's on an installation and it's not working and it's getting close to opening day, we just go out there and we make it work. And so our customers come to rely upon us. And our staff is a unique staff because there isn't really this profit motivation at Alcorn McBride. There's a support motivation. The idea is to always have everybody in the company be happy, and the thing that makes them be happy is designing cool stuff and having customers that are happy with the stuff. So it's a really fun place to work. You're not in a little cubicle and your jobs are not pigeonholed, and you are authorized to spend whatever it takes, time and money, in order to make the customer satisfied. So it's very fulfilling for the right kind of person.
It sounds like a fun place to work. And I think, when you have that combination of employees enjoying their time there and they're working on a great product, quality is good, all those things combined lead to you're selling a good product. And if the focus is that, you're going to have your customers being very, very happy. Sounds a lot like Department 510, right?
Well, absolutely, except Department 510 didn't have to worry about the budget at all.
That's
Somehow
right.
the money just kept getting shoveled in. Loading the money cannons was what we used to call that. At the end of the project, it didn't matter what it cost, just get it open. And in retrospect, there is a strange sort of efficiency to that. Yes, Epcot cost a lot more than they thought it was going to cost because of the way that it was done. But these days, both Disney and Universal spend a lot more money in meetings and planning and positioning things than they did in those days. In those days, almost every dollar that was spent ended up in the product. And I think Indiana Jones Stunt Theater is an example of how that can work, because when they were doing the Disney MGM studios originally, it was supposed to be a really small park. It was a half-day experience, supposedly. And they got down close to opening and decided, we don't even really have enough stuff for a half day here. We need to do this stunt theater. And so in something like 9 months from conception to opening day, they had to throw this really, really complicated thing, both control-wise, set-wise, audio-wise, stunt-wise, effects-wise, and it was all crammed into this amazingly short period of time. And as a result, it didn't cost as much as if they'd spent 3 years on it. Because even though they were spending money as fast as they could during those 9 months, you can only spend it so fast. And so they did get it done, as is often the case with these projects. It meant working 16 hours a day for a lot of people, but it happened. And, that was a throwback to the Epcot days when the whole American Adventure staff was working 16 hours a day. I put the little chart that we drew up of everybody's assignment to show how this team of about 7 people had 24-hour coverage because we were all only allotted 8 hours a day to not be in the pavilion. And usually we were still in the pavilion. We were just sleeping in the VIP area, which was a concrete floor at the time.
That's incredible. I read in your book about the hours that you and many others worked to get the park open. Particular emphasis on American Adventure. You talked a lot about that attraction and how complex it was. And how is it working for 8+ hours, 16 hours a day, and then having no days off and very little sleep? And when do you have time to eat? How is that mentally as you approach opening day for Epcot?
Well, I couldn't do it now, but at the time we were all in our mid-20s, and so we had the energy and the enthusiasm to do it and the terror and panic that it wasn't working to motivate us. And so I don't think anybody who worked on that would trade that experience for anything, even though you look back at it and on it and you go, "You worked 110 hours? It was a week." It was just it was craziness, but yeah, we got it done. They would bring us food occasionally, a hamburger would show up or whatever. But yeah, it was craziness, but it was fun.
American Adventure, one of my favorite attractions, and still impressed by how it works, how it's put together. When I think of Ed Fewer, Randy Bright, Glenn Burkett, and Steve Alcorn, and many others that were involved in that attraction, there's carriages underneath the audience that come out, they rise during the different scenes. At that time, that had to sound almost impossible to do.
Oh, yeah. It was really, really hard. And they started building that building before they even knew what was going to be in it. We thought that it was going to be a turntable, a circular turntable, kind of like Bear Band and Country Bear Jamboree that rotated to bring up different acts, which wouldn't have worked. There were so many figures. In my memoir, Curious by Design, I actually have devoted 2 chapters to American Adventure where I diagrammed out where everything is because people are always asking, where are all these sets? Where are all the figures? How is all this coming up in the same spot? And so I explain what had to be done in order to keep things from running into each other because you have a giant carriage, 14 feet high, weighs several 100,000 pounds, and it's rolling underneath the audience. So it just kind of slides into this concrete tomb, if you will, and indexes itself so that 1 or 2 lifts can come up in front of the rear projection screen. They have to come up in 10 seconds, so they're very powerful. So they're 8,000 PSI hydraulic lifts, and all of that is riding on the carriage with them. So there's just kind of a snake of cables and stuff that they're dragging behind on the carriage as it rolls back and forth to do the show. And so if one of those lifts were to come up under the audience, it would crush the character. If it were to come up under the rear projection screen, it would crush the character and crush the screen. And if the carriage were to move while the lift was up, it would tear down the screen and destroy the character. So there's all those collisions. And then there's another carriage, as if that wasn't complicated enough, that moves from the right to the left, that does the raft in the river scene with Frederick Douglass on it. And that raft can slam into the side of the big carriage if it's down, and if it's up and it goes over the big carriage and something comes up on the big carriage, it can hit the raft. And that actually happened one time when we were running. Fortunately, it missed the character, but it crushed the edge of the set. For poor Chief Joseph, his set got kind of crunched. There was a gasp from the audience when that one happened. And just to make it even more complicated, Will Rogers rides on that carriage because that's the only way to get him onto the set because the raft went through that spot too. So the raft goes down and then Will comes up. And so that's all kind of a bit of craziness. And then at night when they're working on everything, you can pull the carriage all the way to the back of the building, which is where it ends up at the end of the show anyway, so that you can access all of the lifts. But then if you're doing any work on the lifts, it's all really dangerous. If there's anybody anywhere near them and they move, that person now has less of themselves attached to them. And so we had a check-in, check-out system that we had to use, that if anybody was in the whole area, their tag was missing from this board so that we'd know that everything needed to remain powered down and safe. But then how do you work on equipment that's powered down and safe if it only malfunctions when it's powered up and not safe? So lots and lots of challenges on that one. That's why it took such a big team to get that to work. And, I didn't start at WDI until the spring of 1982. So all of those crazy stories from the book are from that very compressed time frame of months. And when I started, we still didn't really have any idea what the control system for those lifts was going to be like because the hydraulics had constantly been being redesigned to the frustration of Glenn Burkett. For years, Ed Fewer would have a new design every week. And so after a few iterations, Glenn got smart and he decided to add a simple computer that he built himself to do that control just of the test lift that Ed was working on. And then we're near opening, and one of the things we had to do in case there was a catastrophic failure of the computer control system is we needed to be able to manually control the lifts. Well, when there's all these different valves on them, manually controlling it is really hard. So without using a computer, I built up this really complicated cabinet full of relays and so on to do it manually. And then shortly before opening, we're sitting there and one of the lifts starts coming up all by itself. Not fast, but it's coming up all by itself. Fortunately, in a spot where there's nothing above it. But it's like, what is happening here? And we discovered that there was an oversight in the hydraulics design, and a single valve failing open would actually cause the lift to slowly rise like that. So then we had to go in and replumb all of the lifts to add another valve, a blocking valve, to prevent the first valve from being a single point failure. And then we had to add another sensor so that we could monitor if the blocking valve itself failed, so that we would know that we didn't have a backup anymore. And this is all being done in the middle of the night, days before opening. So my whole cabinet that I designed to manually control the lifts, we threw it away because we figured all I got to do is open the blocking valve and this other leaky valve, and up the lift comes. But these are, this is craziness, opening day, 10 days away, and let's redesign the whole control system.
You're approaching opening day and you're doing all this work, all this fine tuning. And, the Disney difference really, as I see it, is, they could have just had a film, keep it simple, but they took the extra step to make it the memorable attraction that it is today with the animatronics and the lifts and the carriages and all the work that goes into it. People don't realize that. I watched that show and it's like, oh, they're all out front. They just come up and down. It's simple. It's a simple setup and you don't think about it. But after reading about American Adventure, it's like, wow, that is quite a complex system. And so great job. Kudos to you and your team for making it happen. That it must have been
At
a
the
very
time,
stressful
yeah.
time.
It was terrifying at the time. So it was so complex to do without computers. Years later, my wife redesigned that attraction
Oh,
twice, and now
nice.
it's controlled in a completely different way. I think every scrap of work I did on the original Epcot is now long gone.
American Adventure is a very memorable attraction, one of the greatest shows at Epcot. It has survived the test of time and still impresses me to this day, and for many others. Journey into Imagination, I know you've done some work on Journey into Imagination as well. One of the things I hear about the challenges with that attraction was the turntable. Is that all true about the turntable was as challenging as it was?
It was very hard. The story on that attraction was that the Imagination Pavilion opened on opening day, but it didn't open with Journey into Imagination. And so I was still working on fix-up projects for American Adventure on my 2-week-long business trip. And about March, I guess it was, of 1983, so that would be 6 months after opening or something, they came to me and they said, okay, this attraction is not opening and everybody is pointing fingers at everybody else. We don't know whether it's a vehicle problem, a control problem. We need somebody to take a look at the big picture. And so they made me actually Imagineering's first systems engineer and put me in charge of the programmers and the electronics people and the mechanics people and the maintenance guys in the pavilion. And so I went in there, and the ride control system for that attraction was custom circuit boards, really big, complicated custom circuit boards, which had been put into boxes in the track. And as a result, because the vehicles in that attraction are very long, they were on top of the control equipment that was controlling them nearly all the time. So trying to work on anything was impossible because this box that wasn't correctly controlling the vehicles was under them. And if the vehicle wasn't being controlled, then maintenance would have to get a block and tackle and pull the vehicle into an empty space so that you could examine the box. And so there was a really smart guy named Jim Karstensen, who was a college co-op student working on that project in that attraction. And he and I talked about all the things that were wrong with that approach. And we went to a guy named Chris Lawton, who was the main deprogrammer on that. And he was programming a ride control computer for that attraction. But he didn't have any visibility into all the stuff that was happening in all of these boxes that were in the track. And so Jim and I said, hey, do we really need these boxes, or could you just use the ride control computer to manually count the little fins on the bottom of the vehicles as they go past to figure out where they are, instead of relying upon these flaky boxes to tell you where they are. And Chris said, yeah, I could do that. I can whip up some code to do that. Give me a day or two. And so that night, Jim and I went out to the attraction with the maintenance guys and a pair of wire cutters. And we opened up every one of those boxes and we cut all the wires going in and out of the box, and we wired them together so that the inputs to the box went straight to the outputs to the box, so that the little brake beams that counted the fins went straight back to the ride control computer. And in a couple of days, Chris had it all programmed up so that then he could count the fins and figure out where the vehicles were, which worked pretty well, as long as you figure out where the vehicles are when they first start crossing the little beams that are counting the fins and the power doesn't go off, so you forget how many fins you've counted. You can tell where they are. And so then we went to the guy who was in charge of designing the vehicles, Bob Schwartz, and we said, hey, it's really hard to keep these vehicles completely apart in the load and unload areas because you want them to be as few inches apart so people won't fall between them. Is it okay if they push against each other? And much to his later woe, he said, yeah, that's okay. And so he went through 11 different bumper designs before it was actually okay. But eventually that was the solution, is count the fins with the ride control computer, push the vehicles against each other, and we got the attraction open in 10 days. There was a lot of fix-up work after that, and Jim Carstensen did most of it. And a lot of it related to the danger of inserting the vehicles into the turntable, because the turntable weighed hundreds of thousands of pounds and it was on its own circular railroad tracks, and it was not going to stop very fast. If it just hit something, it was just going to bend up whatever it hit. So inserting the vehicles into that was really, really hard. I can't imagine how that attraction could have been designed to be any harder to accomplish than the way that they ended up with. And when you think about it, what they were trying to do was kind of dumb anyway, because you spend all the money to put people onto a vehicle, and then you move them into this segment of a turntable so that they think that they're not moving anymore. Why wasn't that just a pre-show? But anyway, Jim spent a lot of time coming up with weird diagonal paths for brake beams and so on to detect if a vehicle incurred into the space for the turntable. And we, with fingers crossed and teeth gritted, tested it one night. And indeed, in the nick of time, the turntable came to a stop and did not crush the vehicle that was entering it. And so it ran that way for many years. And then it turned out that running a train over the same track thousands and thousands of times is really hard on the track and the wheels. And nobody had thought of that when they built the attraction, but they built the attraction around the track. And so there was no way that it could be maintained once the train track and the train wheels began to fail. And so that was one of the reasons for that attraction to be redesigned into the disaster that it became in its next iteration.
Tell me how you really feel.
They had to get, well, everybody feels that way about that attraction. That attraction lasted less than a year, I think, because everybody said, this is the world's biggest sacrilege.
Even Michael Eisner didn't like it. So if the boss doesn't like it, then
but in all fairness, they had to get rid of the turntable. The other things they did were awful, but they had to get rid of the turntable. There was no choice about that.
So you said that the turntable had a different track than the rest of the ride, or was it the same?
The vehicle was on a track, and the vehicle wasn't wearing out the track any more than the rest of the track would be worn, which was fine. The vehicles are light.
Yeah.
And it's a typical, like a roller coaster track that the vehicle is running on, no problem. It's the turntable itself that was supported on genuine train tracks, railroad tracks, but curved under there. And it weighs hundreds of thousands of pounds. And you think, well, so does a locomotive. What's the big deal? But a locomotive doesn't go around in the same circle all day long every day for years and years and years. So when they talked to train people, they said, oh, you can't do that. Well, it was about 10 years too late.
Journey into Imagination and Horizons were two attractions that I could remember that are just engraved in my brain as like let's transition into Horizons. I mean, Horizons probably my number one attraction. Obviously, the technological advances with Horizons was off the charts at that time. What were some of the projects you worked on with Horizons?
I love dark rides. I think everybody misses Horizons. It was a huge mistake. And I'm sure these days, it's water under the bridge, but I think most of the Disney people will admit it was a huge mistake. A lot of the original Epcot attractions were so good, such good dark rides, that it was a mistake to so heavily alter them. There were problems with them, like the ending of Horizons, as complicated as it was, didn't work very well. The video was lousy, and you could see the different colors of the projectors as you moved across them and so on. But that was just one little part of the ride. The whole select your own ending thing on Horizons seemed like a good idea during the blue sky time, but I don't know if it was a big appealing moment of the attraction or not. But if it was, it could have been re-engineered now to look fantastic. And the rest of what was in that ride was fantastic and still would be fantastic. So it's a shame that it's not there anymore. My involvement in Horizons was that it was to open on the first anniversary of Epcot. So October 1st of 83. And so after I did Imagination in the spring, my wife had been working on fix-up work at Epcot, which involved the monitor cabinet system, which was all over all of the different attractions. And since she'd done 10 of the attractions, she had a lot of monitor cabinets, and they all connected back to Epcot Central, but the system had never been finished. The programming was still going on. It was called the monitor cabinet build process, and it was a process, but the software programmers, who were mostly in California, just couldn't get it to work. The monitor cabinet's job was to collect 30,000 different data points from all around Epcot. Things like hydraulic pressure, air pressure, positions of doors, anything that might be broken, and then to issue commands like be able to bring the show up or bring the show down, turning on and off all of the different electrical panels, synchronizing the parade all the way around the parade route that went around World Showcase in those days, flushing the urinals. Anything that you can think of was connected into this monitor cabinet system. And so it had been cobbled together with the absolute bare minimum of functionality, hand-coded to get the opening day attractions to work. But those were simple opening day attractions that might have a handful of tape starts that might play the opening welcome to a show or something when an operator pushed a button. Horizons was different. Horizons had 170 triggered audio spiels being transmitted to whatever vehicle you were in through dynamic routing. So I think about it. The audio's coming from Central. You're in a vehicle that's moving around the track. How on earth does the right audio get to your vehicle? And so the audio routing was part of the system, but then playing back all of these radio station cartridge tapes at Central was the other part of the system. And if you stand there and you watch the racks and racks of these cartridge tapes with the lights blinking on them, you see that it's like a wildfire, blink, 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 as these triggers are being fired from all over the building as dozens of vehicles are firing 170 different audio tracks. There was nothing in place to be able to do that. So here we are down to the last few weeks before Horizons is supposed to open, and there's no connection between all of this audio and the attraction. Well, when we had to get American Adventure open, we ran into the same sort of problem, that the monitor cabinet in American Adventure was the only actual computer in the whole building. It wasn't a PC or anything. It was a computer we built ourselves, but it was genuinely the only intelligent piece of equipment in the whole building. And so I had to write a custom operating system for that monitor cabinet in order to get American Adventure open, because we had a lot of complicated things we were checking on at American Adventure. Things like, how long is the show? How long does the spill time and fill time have to be for the audience, depending upon how many people came through the people counter at the front of the building? That was all custom coded stuff in my monitor cabinet software. And so the natural thing to do when you've only got 3 weeks left and Horizons is supposed to open is say, well, I've got this operating system I wrote for American Adventure. Why don't I take out the things that are specific to American Adventure and just make it be a monitor cabinet operating system? And we'll shove all of these tape starts into it from Horizons, and then we can open Horizons. And so that's what we did. And it was a really close call to getting that working in time. And subsequently, eventually, that software then got deployed to all the other monitor cabinets around Epcot.
There was no feeling like riding Horizons and experiencing that. I'm not sure if this is true about, the structure of the building. They had to make a sinkhole story, which was near Odyssey, which that's a whole other discussion. Could they have fixed that attraction in 1999 when they eventually decided to close it?
Yeah, the reason Horizons closed is the same reason a lot of stuff got redone, like Imagination being redone. Sponsorship. GE didn't want to come up with another 10 years of sponsorship. And that's why Imagination got ruined, is that Kodak wanted something new. And so what they got new was not what anybody wanted, but it was all to renew the sponsorship. So it's sad about Horizons. It would have been nice if somebody else had come in to sponsor it, but GE went on just sponsoring the Illuminations show. And so with no sponsor, it didn't continue. And that's also where Test Track came from. World of Motion is gone because General Motors wanted something fresh. And we got to do some fun work. We did the post show, which is long since gone, but the whole driving technologies lab was a fun post show that Alcorn McBride actually got to do a lot of for the redo on the first version of Test Track. And that was fun because part of the set piece in there was lockers, and that was the time when I got my name onto a locker in a guest area, and I got to fill it with my own junk, so I put a bunch of my own circuit boards and coffee cups and things into my locker so you could see it. That was fun for a few years to have that. But yeah, I miss those old dark rides. The only one, I guess, that really survives now is Spaceship Earth is still pretty much Spaceship Earth. They've redone the ending part a lot of times, but that was never the highlight. That was just more like, how the heck do we get these people down now that we're all the way up here?
Spaceship Earth is another interesting attraction that I think one of the most technologically advanced attractions. One of them when they built Epcot. It's amazing that they haven't made any renovations or changes to that track, as far as I understand, in almost 45 years.
It was really difficult to get that to work. Reliance Electric provided all those motors that were down in the track, and I still remember the guy from Reliance Electric, the rep, coming out, and they took him into that building the first time and they showed him what they'd done with all of their motors. And he looked up at all that track and down, and he said, "Oh, this ain't gonna work." And it didn't. They had to double or triple the number of motors that they had in the track. But that's like the old people mover at Disneyland, where there's just tires rubbing against the bottom of the vehicles to move them around. And the problem there is that the vehicles are in a continuous chain. They're not individual, and they're all connected together by tow bars. And so it's like a pearl necklace, basically, going up this great big long thing and coming back down again. Well, think about how much weight the tow bar between the two vehicles at the top is supporting. It's basically holding up the entire necklace on both sides of the ride, other than whatever the motors are contributing to trying to push vehicles up or help slow them on the way down or whatever. And so even if you have absolutely perfect motor control, there's a lot of stress on those vehicles. So we would ride it in the middle of the night to do testing or whatever, and every once in a while there'd be this bang, and one of the tow bars had snapped. You didn't want to be around when that happened, and you didn't want to hear the maintenance guys cussing when that happened, because they'd have to replace it and get them all hooked up again together, which, you're trying to pull them together and hook them together. And then there's also a cam system that rotates the vehicles, like in Haunted Mansion, that, rotates your Omni mover to look in whatever direction you want. And it was not very reliable during the early days when Epcot first opened. So for the longest time, there was a guy standing in the dark there watching to make sure that the vehicles were rotating you around so that you would not end up going back down the ride face first and falling out of your vehicle. And so he'd have to step up and manually rotate the vehicle if it failed to rotate. So it took some time to get all of that fixed and working. Also, still the time when we were making programming changes. So my only interaction with that is that my wife was working on doing the programming, the timing for the audio and stuff on that attraction, and making sure that they all worked. And so these were the golden days for us, because we would sleep much of the day and then go out to a nice dinner someplace at some steakhouse or something. And then along about 10 or 11 o'clock, we would go out to Epcot and we had the park to ourselves. Everybody was gone, and we'd call up the maintenance guys and say, "Hey, we want to fire up Spaceship Earth. And so the two of us would go out there and we'd get on the ride and ride around it and take notes and then go back down into our luxurious office in the basement opposite the trash dumpster for the cafeteria there, reprogram things, and then go back to Spaceship Earth and ride it again all night long or whatever it took. And I can remember we were doing that in imagination at the Magic Eye Theater. The pre-show outside of it was Making Memories, a Kodak slide pre-show, and we were trying to adjust the timing for the entrance doors and the show lighting and the operator spiel and so on. And we had to run the whole show in a cycle in order to check any timing changes. There was no way to just check one little thing. And so we were lying there on the carpet, which you're not allowed to do during the day, but at night it's fine. And so we're lying there on the carpet waiting for this slideshow to go through for the umpteenth millionth time that night and making notes on timing and stuff. And we're lying there and we're saying, you know what? These are the good old days. And they were.
We remember those days at Epcot Center, walking into the park, walking under Spaceship Earth, and everything was just so massive. Everything was so big, all these large attractions. It's why people keep going back. And it's those experiences and those memories. Usually after a big project, there's massive layoffs. Does that affect you knowing that this could possibly happen to you after a big project?
Well, it didn't really affect me because I was a consultant. So all this time I was being paid by the hour, so I didn't mind the 110-hour weeks. And, when a consultant's job is done, they move on. So they had been talking about making me senior scientist at Department 510, but I had no delusions that that department was going to remain at any significant size. So it didn't really impact me. And I think most of the people there knew that the axe was coming. So I think everybody pretty much left very professionally, finished up their work, and exited on schedule, having made sure that the last I was dotted. And ultimately, that 200-person department ended up with 5 people. My wife eventually got laid off. She was there for a while, but eventually she was laid off and then was almost immediately rehired by Disney, but by Don Iwerks at the studio. And so she ended up working for the projection department, which was branching out into doing control systems and so on. And this was a time when Disney was looking for outside work. And so it actually was a great opportunity for my wife because she ended up project managing 4 attractions for Vancouver's Expo 86 that used Disney equipment, and she designed all the cabinets and had to do everything from supervising the export of all the stuff on trucks to supervising the importation of the projectors and the installation of all the equipment in the attractions and getting that expo open for the 4 clients that had hired Disney to do it, including Bob Rogers did one of those attractions. It was the General Motors attraction, which was the original Spirit Lodge, which was later redone as Mystery Lodge, still my all-time favorite theater show at Knott's Berry Farm. Well, the original was this fake hologram effect, very impressive at Expo 86 for Spirit Lodge. And so my wife and Glenn Burkett also worked on that for her. And then after that project ended, she moved back to Imagineering to work on Euro Disney and a bunch of other projects. And then ultimately ended up replacing the control system basically in every single attraction at all of the parks at Walt Disney World. So at one point, I don't think that there was more than a handful of attractions she hadn't touched or redesigned or whatever, including all of mine and everybody else's as well. She finally retired after, I think, 37, 38 years with Disney, 36, something like that. So she was quite famous in her own right as the lady who did all of the show control everywhere for a long time.
You both have done some creating those memories for millions and millions of people. It's why people continue to talk about these attractions decades after they're gone. I know we're almost at the end here. Give us one of your stories from Department 510, something that pops in your mind that you just want to share with the audience here.
Ira Frank was a guy who worked for me at several companies later on, who worked in 510 with Linda. And Ira was and is a perfectionist to this day about many things, but he was also a complete slob about his cubicle. Everything that in his office was just mounded up in an immense pile or whatever. And somehow somebody, I don't even remember who it was, had bought a refrigerator for their home. And when the refrigerator was delivered, it apparently had been the demonstration model that was on the showroom floor of the department store that it came from. And they had neglected to remove the fake plastic turkey that was inside of it. And so someone at Department 510 snuck in and took the plastic turkey and hung it by a thread over Ira's office as the sort of coup de grace on the debris of his office. There was that sort of camaraderie and fun-loving nature. Another thing that comes to mind is people would always post funny stuff around the office. For a while, there were bumper stickers and things going around saying, "We can do it." And during the layoff era, these bumper stickers would had changed. They had changed to "We did it." Well, some people edited their bumper sticker so it said "Wed did it to me."
Very nice. Sure, you have millions of other stories, and you and your wife could probably speak for hours and hours about these great stories. Tell us about your books related to the theme parks and where people can find them.
Well, thanks. I've got 3 books that I think would most interest people who've been listening to this. One is the one that you've mentioned multiple times, Building a Better Mouse, which has now, I guess, it's in its 40th anniversary edition and has been upgraded with some pictures and so on. And then Theme Park Design is my best-selling book, which is all about all those different jobs we were talking about before. So if you want to know how to get that job, it walks you through all the different people that are involved in creating an attraction from blue sky on. So you can decide whether to go to art school or engineering school or business school or whatever based upon what's in theme park design. And then most recently, I wrote my memoir, Curious by Design, which is not all about theme parks, but it has a lot of theme park stuff in there. So in particular, people who are interested in American adventure will find a lot of depth of information about that attraction and some other Disney attractions, and then a lot of other attractions at parks around the world. And the best place to go for all of those books and my other books, because I've got about 25 books out now, but just the 3 theme park books. But anyway, you'll find everything at themeperks.com. That's with an E, themeperks.com. You find all the books there, and my classes in Imagineering and my writing classes and so on are all there. So, and some fun stuff. It's a fun site to browse around on.
Thanks for sharing all that, Steve. Thank you for the memories and all the work that you and your wife and your teams have done at Epcot Center. Welcome back here anytime to tell more of your stories, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. Have a great day.
You too.